Hello and thank you for sticking with us. Welcome to the second video in our series on colonial mascots. If you've made it this far, you've made a very important choice to learn more about settler colonialism, and we're very glad that you have. In today's episode, we will be dipping our toes into settler colonial theory. I say we'll be dipping our toes because the topic of settler colonialism is so vast, and there is no possible way that we could cover that amount of theory in this small series. So in this episode, we will focus on the theory that will allow us to develop a deeper understanding of settler colonialism, as well as on the specific pieces that will help us in our discussion on how Indigenous mascots contribute to and reproduce the settler colonial system that works to oppress Indigenous peoples. For the purpose of this episode, we will call upon a variety of scholars as well as the information that we have learned in our classes so far at the University of Lethbridge. I think it is really important that we acknowledge that we are also on this journey to learn more about settler colonialism, and I hope we will learn together throughout this series. If you would like to read the works of the scholars that we draw upon in this episode, or any other later episode in the series, or if you would simply like to see the bibliographic citations for these works, you will find those in the descriptions of each video. The first piece of settler colonial theory that we will cover is the distinction between colonialism and settler colonialism. Now, the information that I'm going to use for this is drawn primarily from lectures from our course on settler colonialism at the University of Lethbridge. This means that there will not be an academic citation in the description for this video. Now, colonialism and settler colonialism are actually different, even though they both have a similar name. So colonialism occurs when a group of colonizers enters a territory that is inhabited by a different group of people. They do so with the intent to exploit the resources of these peoples and their lands for economic gain. However, at the end of this, they vacate the territory. Settler colonialism occurs when the colonialists come into the territory that is again inhabited by a different group of peoples, and they not only exploit the resources but the lands for economic gains. This means that they steal both resources and lands, and they never leave the territory. Now, this is the case in both Canada and the United States, where the colonial forces came in and took the lands of the Indigenous peoples, and they never left the territory, and they still reside there. Now, there are some important pieces of information regarding settler colonialism that we need to address. Again, this information is drawn from the lectures of our university courses. The first piece of information we need to address is that settler colonialism is not located in the past. Settler colonialism is ongoing to this day. Indigenous lands and resources are currently still being exploited. The second piece of information is that settler colonialism is not an event, but it is a system that is both built and reproduced through the destruction of Indigenous cultures and ways of being, and the construction of a new social order that is also built and reproduced. This piece about reproducing the colonial system will be of utmost importance to our discussion on the ways that Indigenous mascots contribute to and reproduce the colonial system that works to oppress Indigenous peoples. In this section, we will draw on Tia Andrews' work on hegemonic culture and Indigenous stereotypes, as well as the lecture contents from our course on settler colonialism at the University of Lethbridge. Now, Tia Andrews' works that we will be drawing on actually goes a lot deeper into the ways that Indigenous peoples can use hegemonic culture to actively resist settler colonialism. Now, this work is extremely important, and we need to focus more on the ways that Indigenous peoples resist colonialism, and we urge you to please visit her works through the description in the video. However, for the purpose of this series, we'll be focusing on the ways that hegemonic culture and Indigenous stereotypes contribute to and reproduce the settler colonial system. Both Tia Andrews and our course on settler colonialism have touched on how the settler colonial system is reproduced by reducing Indigenous peoples to empty stereotypes and tropes. By reducing Indigenous peoples to wildly inaccurate stereotypes and tropes, the colonial system allows the issues that are actually facing Indigenous peoples on a daily basis to remain invisible. In addition, the reduction of Indigenous peoples to stereotypes and tropes is extremely dehumanizing. By dehumanizing Indigenous peoples through their reduction to stereotypes and tropes, the colonial system continues to devalue them and their rights while continuing to oppress them. One way that the colonial system reduces Indigenous peoples to stereotypes and tropes is through Indigenous mascots for sporting teams and schools. If you'd like to find out more about this, please stick around for Lainey's next video on Mascot theory. Thanks for joining us!